Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Diary of a Death Doula, 25 Lessons the Dying Teach Us About the Afterlife, by Debra Diamond, Ph.D., narrated by Kim Niemi. Author's Preface. 10 years ago, I had a transformative experience which led me to examine all my assumptions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and life and death. Let me put it this way. To say my life was turned upside down would be a profound understatement. Everything I knew and did in my life changed dramatically. I left my high-profile position as a money manager, CNBC commentator, and professor at Johns Hopkins University to pursue a life of purpose and spirituality. I became a psychic medium and began to use my skills and gifts to help others and to explore the invisible realms beyond the material world. As my journey progressed, my path continued to shift towards the direction of service to others, and one result has been my deep involvement in the world of hospice. In 2015, I became a hospice death doula, someone who sits bedside with the actively dying. Now I've had the privilege and honor of spending time with many patients at end of life. There's no place I'd rather be, no work that is more rewarding. Easing fears of death and dying. The idea for Diary of a Death Doula came from what I experienced sitting bedside with the dying as a death doula, perceiving sacred realities. Because of our culture's fear of death, I thought it might be helpful if I could share stories about my work with you, in the hopes it will alleviate your fears and anxieties about end of life and death, and provide comfort and information to all. In the interest of privacy, I've obscured or combined the identities and conditions of the patients. Being a death doula has given me a richer appreciation for life, and that's just one of the many lessons of this work. I'll share more life lessons with you as we continue on, and hope you find them as reassuring and inspiring as I do. Perhaps what I learned and experienced will change the way you think about life and death, open up the conversation, and even challenge your own personal beliefs. Ordinary and extraordinary. Working as a death doula is surprisingly life-affirming, not morbid or sad as so many believe. Being in a hospice setting teeming with clinicians and specialists, nurses, aides, chaplains, and other volunteers, filling roles that might strike others as impossibly dreary, can be deceiving. Why would anyone willingly do this work? But like any other profession, there's more to it than meets the eye. During the time I sit with the dying, extraordinary things can happen, or not much at all. The work is spiritual and sacred, but it's not for everyone. When I'm driving home at the end of my day, my concerns always seem to melt away as my perspective shifts and I give thanks for my many blessings. In Diary of a Death Doula, I'll take you with me on what turned out to be a remarkable journey full of stories and insights and plenty of surprises. I'd like to think a different perspective about end of life and death will enable you to consider a new way of thinking of death, not as an end, as so many believe, but as a continuation. In Diary of a Death Doula, I look at death on 3 distinct planes: the physical, the soul, and the afterlife. But my perspective is unique. As a psychic medium as well as a doula, I have the ability to bring the invisible realm into the visible, and to recognize the interplay we don't often perceive through our 5 senses. I bring an additional perspective as well, since I've spent many years researching and working with the phenomenon of the NDE, the near-death experience. Unlike my hospice work, working with the dying, the individuals who experience NDEs return to their bodies to continue life. I wrote about the near-death experience and consciousness in my first book, Life After Near Death, Miraculous Stories of Healing and Transformation in the Extraordinary Lives of People with Newfound Powers. That book examines life-altering NDE experiences through interviews with many individuals who've had them. Now, in Diary of a Death Doula, I delve into not what we call near death, but actual death. Rather than being an unusual or strange experience to go from one situation to the other, I realized it was another leg of the same journey that allowed me to offer stories and insights about life, death, and the nature of consciousness. In the end, I was given a much deeper look than I expected. Introduction. Here's a question for you. What would you think if we could take the fear and anxiety away from death and dying? Do you think that's possible? For many, the idea of decoupling fear and death seems nearly impossible. It's not the message most of us are used to hearing, even if we believe in the concept of some form of the afterlife. However, as a medium and death doula, I'm convinced more is going on in the realm of death and dying than most of us have been told or understand. In my work at hospice, these patients didn't tell me about the process of dying. They showed me their journeys, and those became the basis of the stories in this book. I share these extraordinary and profound stories with you in the hope they will open your mind to new possibilities too. The questions. Sooner or later, everyone eventually asks questions about end of life. What happens to me when my physical body dies? Is there an afterlife? If so, where do I go? Do my loved ones meet me? Will they usher me to the next plane of existence? Young or old, single or married, rich, poor, or in between, we all seek answers to the essential questions of what lies ahead. Death itself is not only universal, even thinking about it is one of life's great equalizers. What is death? If you Google death, what will you find? Wikipedia says, a typically sad event because of the termination of social and familial bonds. If you Google dying, you might get the Oxford Dictionary definition, ceasing to exist. I admit, neither of these sounds great, right? In our attempts to deny that death occurs, we've even gone so far to adopt slang like passed or at peace or didn't make it to avoid saying death or dead or dying. But what if these assumptions are wrong? What if death isn't a blank screen, a descent into nothingness, or a one-way ticket to the horizontal Hilton? What if we continue to exist, but the various scenes we've been told to picture are wrong? What if everything we know about death and dying not only isn't true, but our culture's limiting beliefs make end of life and death so scary? What if? The implications of a new way of looking at death are immense. Just imagine if the mainstream scientific community confirmed life after death. Think of the impact on science, religion, philosophy, and even the arts. On a personal level, consider how you might live if you knew for sure you were eternal. Think how it would free you to live unfettered by fear. Imagine what life might be like if we all incorporated the truths of eternal souls and related to each other through love, kindness, and consideration. A new way to envision death and dying is available to everyone. It doesn't matter who you are or what culture you represent. From what I have seen and felt, people of all ages and backgrounds experience a vast realm of awe during this last stage of what we call life. In fact, a hidden journey takes place, and my work and abilities as a doula and medium make it possible to share this invisible reality with you, and it's nothing like what you've been told before. Logically, you might think, how does she know this? This is probably just another stupid woo-woo or feel-good book. Or you're thinking, this book can't possibly help me. I've lost loved ones and I've watched family members suffer and die. I don't buy this. Not for a minute. Fair enough. But I hope you'll keep listening. Perhaps you'll think, maybe, just maybe, there's something to this. The ways of modern death. As science has come to occupy a prominent place in Western culture, our relationship with death has been altered. In our scientific culture, death has been translated into a soulless clinical experience that strikes fear into the heart of almost everyone. Some of us readily admit we're afraid of the pain of actually dying, while others aren't afraid of death, but become anxious thinking about the unfathomable. It's like a picture we can't quite bring into focus. Some of the most rational and intelligent individuals I know simply refuse to talk about death, in the belief that those discussions will bring it on sooner. So not only does the physical process bring us discomfort, but the role of superstition and tempting fate is also a factor. No wonder that most conversations about death are almost too much for most of us to handle. Who answers the questions? These days, many of us believe that science can explain almost anything. We count on science to explain how we approach our day-to-day existence, communicate with each other, maintain our physical bodies, make decisions, fall in love, and tell us about our place as humans in the universe. In fact, in our Western culture, science has become so powerful it has extended its hold to our views of death and end of life. How we think about death has become heavily influenced by the fact that death is largely treated in medical settings, where we're viewed as diseases and treatments rather than patients. Going even further, patients can also be viewed as evidence of failure, the failure of science to stop death in its tracks. We repeat phrases like, "Where there's life, there's hope," even when we know that isn't strictly true. We may declare ourselves fighters who will beat a disease, because that disease often leads to death. Given all that, is it any wonder we often view death as an antiseptic event we not only will do almost anything to avoid, but approach as if it's the enemy? Yes, scientific pursuits have given us the chance to improve the human condition. No doubt about it. However, since science is primarily helpful in our dealings with the observable universe, it has its limitations. Because what transpires in death and dying is largely outside the observable universe. The invisible exists within the visible, and this cannot be understood by pure observation. There's more at play at end of life and death than meets the eye. We can't weigh and measure it or classify it into scientific categories, and we can't examine it under a microscope or in a CT scan. That's why we need to remove the limitations of the physical body and create another vision of death, and perhaps even another language to describe it. How do we deal with death? Since death isn't like other issues, we can't problem solve our way out of it. So we attempt to deal with it by avoiding it altogether and fool ourselves, at least temporarily, that these tactics will make it go away and not happen to us. We're kept apart, or choose to be apart, from death. Let's face it, death is an ill-fitting suit we'd rather not try on. Because we lack a full frontal acceptance of death, talking about it is mostly taboo. It's hardly the go-to topic around the Thanksgiving dinner table, even if someone in the family is gravely ill. In fact, that might make everyone go to even greater lengths to avoid mentioning it. And with great success, I might add. But does it have to be this way? I don't believe so, and all the research I've done and experiences I've had tell me we can dial back the fear. I wrote this book to show you how, and to advance the conversation about a new 21st century view of death. Wait, do you mean we can change our perspective on death? Absolutely. The reset I'm talking about starts with information that changes our thinking and allows us to consider Death 2.0 rather than Death 0.0. So I start with the premise that it's time for a different way of looking at, thinking about, and dealing with death. A new understanding of death is nothing less than an opportunity to transform ourselves both personally and collectively. And the process starts with redefining death. A medium's perspective on death and what's beyond. As I said earlier, I'm a psychic and a medium, and that means I deal with the unseen world in order to offer proof of survival beyond death. Mediums are a link between dimensions. That's the nature of our gift. As you can imagine, a medium's perspective is very different from the scientific or the Western medical model. Our approach is no less valid, although acceptance of mediumship is still questioned, since there's simply no scientific way to prove or disprove metaphysical or psychic abilities. We mediums believe in the spiritual, the possibilities that exist beyond our knowing, and the evidence and information we are able to capture outside the bounds of ordinary reality. As a medium, I have the ability to access information beyond the usual sensory inputs and give a concrete essence to places that are by nature hard to picture. As a clairvoyant, I bring a special perspective to the study of death and dying, since I'm frequently able to see happenings not observable by the naked eye. For me, receiving this information is like how most people see or breathe. It's like having another sense. At first, it scared and confused me, but now I don't even question it. Mediums work in the non-physical realm, just as the scientific community works in the realm of measurable observations. So to approach this work of death and dying as a medium, we must first understand that dying is not an ordinary state of consciousness, not measurable, weighable, or quantitative. It's an altered state requiring us to think in terms of dimensions beyond our three-dimensional world. This is a difficult concept for many to grasp, but particularly tough for the scientific community. The lack of acceptance of this altered state concept is also one of the primary reasons why the study of death and dying hasn't advanced significantly in the 20th century, or in this early part of the 21st. The notion that we can exist in multiple dimensions, although suggested by quantum physics and quantum mechanics, is too great of a leap for many, and especially true for many mainstream scientists. Based on my ability as a medium and doula, my work allows me to acknowledge the role of energy in the universe, and to understand the reality that life on Earth is but one small part of the overall picture. As I see it, rather than excluding science, my viewpoint complements it. As a medium and death doula, I am able to see the concerns of the dying and what is important to them. I am also able to see who is with them and their soul's journey. As a result of what I've had the privilege of seeing, feeling, and knowing, I'm less afraid of death and more open to the possibilities that lie beyond. As you can imagine, some people think what I do is hocus pocus. Others think it's cray-cray. That's okay. My job is not to convince you. But if you believe in this other realm, are inclined to, or have had some experience yourself, you will know what I'm telling you is true. Even if you don't believe in any form of life beyond death and think the notion of the afterlife is bunk, that's okay too. Hopefully you'll still take something away by your willingness to keep an open mind. About this book. What you'll find in this book is a description of the full range of my duties as a death doula, from my training and interactions with patients and families to the life lessons I learned from the dying. In Diary of a Death Doula, you'll hear how our loved ones in spirit are waiting in the wings to meet and attend to the dying. You'll learn you don't have to be very spiritual or religious to experience the love, and how the meaning of life is revealed to the dying. I also describe the way the spirit leaves the body at end of life to go on its journey. In addition, I also talk about the 24/7 world of hospice, from the interdisciplinary care to the teams who treat the patients, And, of course, I'll discuss the metaphysical and spiritual encounters that confirm we are more than our physical bodies. The continuation of life, the survival of the soul, and the role the universe plays run through all these narratives and stories. What I've learned from all my work, and that I'll share with you, is that your soul continues on with or without your physical body. Here's even better news. Your soul grows and interacts on a much higher and richer plane once we pass. So whether it's off to heaven for eternity or to come back around, whether you pass peacefully at 100 or suddenly at a younger age, my work affirms what many have been taught, and also provides good news to the skeptics. Yes, we continue. Our essence endures. This book is divided into 4 parts. In Part 1, I examine cultural beliefs about death and the impact of science and religion on our views of death. In Part 2, I tell you a little about my background and explain the basic definitions of hospice and death doulas. In Part 3, I present cases, stories of patients at end of life, their journeys, and the lessons we all can learn from the dying. Following each case are passages, sacred reflections, summarizing and key points to keep in mind about what I observed and noted about my experiences, including healing and spiritual ideas. Perhaps you will open up to these ideas and think about them after you finish listening. In Part 4, I examine consciousness at end of life and in the afterlife. I step back and explain how serving as a death doula has affected me, and how we can consider a new, updated 21st century view of death. The first part of the book aims to lay a foundation for this work and an understanding of what hospice does. However, if you're mainly interested in the patient stories, you might skip ahead to Part 3 and bypass the technical explanations of hospice and my background as a medium. You can always come back and listen again to it later. At the end of the day, this is the journey of all of us, the story of our relationship with the universe, reality, and consciousness. It's not easy to comprehend what we call death and the mysteries of the universe, but I hope this diary helps you understand our essential energetic nature and that our souls seem connected to a much larger reality. Is death an existentialist mystery? Or is the answer right here, just beyond us? Part 1. A Cultural History of Death. It Wasn't Always Taboo. In the ancient world, human cultures were open to the mysteries of life, in some cases more open than we are today. Our ancestors had respect for the invisible world, if for no other reason than their lack of an alternative explanation for virtually all natural phenomena. It was routine for ancient cultures to revere and respect the dead, and they were commonly included in the lives of the living and even consulted for guidance. Sometimes they were treated in death as if they were still alive. In ancient cultures, the idea that the soul survived death was well accepted. Descriptions of communities of spirits, underworlds, heaven, and realms of the dead were incorporated into life. Many of these beliefs continued throughout history and cultures for thousands of years. Not until we reach more modern times do these beliefs begin to be questioned or disregarded. The Incas preserved their dead, sought their guidance, and even put them in chairs and carried them to parties and other social events. The Maya buried their dead below the living room floor to keep them involved as an extension of the family. This veneration of the ancestors stemmed partly from the belief that the dead continued to exist and partly as a way to ensure the ancestors' continued well-being. Like the Mayans and the Incas, the Mesopotamians, going back in 3100 BC, believed the dead continued an animated existence in the form of spirit. According to the Mesopotamians, the soul reunites with relatives who precede them in death, which is consistent with what I witnessed as a death doula. Anthropologists have discerned that nearly 2,500 years ago, the Mesopotamians believed that the soul was not immediately transported to the netherworld after bodily death, but had to undergo an arduous journey in order to reach it. The ancient Egyptians believed that even in death they would live again, and these ideas are in many ways similar to what I encountered as a death doula. The continuity of life was demonstrated over and over in my work, as patients traveled to their new home, visiting with family and loved ones on the other side, taking their beliefs, memories, and essence with them. To the Egyptians, death was the necessary first step to reaching the afterlife, a journey they prepared for thoroughly during their lifetimes. Even in more recent Victorian times, death was openly discussed and mortality was confronted head-on. Death in Victorian times was described as a journey of passage where the near and dear were ultimately heaven-bound. Elaborate displays were part of the Victorian celebration of death, and the advent of photography even enabled mourners to pose with the dead laid out in their coffins before they set off for burial. Up until the 20th century, most people died at home, with family and friends around them. Death was an accepted part of life. Nowadays, we live much longer and prefer to lean towards the working hypothesis that medicine and healthy living, exercise, stress reduction, and good nutrition will prolong our lives, and psychologically speaking, that death won't actually happen to us. The impact of religion on our beliefs about death. It's really hard to talk about death and dying without some mention of religion and its power to comfort some but strike fear in others. What about your own attitudes and apprehensions about death and dying? You may be religious and approach the subject with certain beliefs, or perhaps you count yourself among the growing number with no particular religious affiliation, but are not an atheist either? Undoubtedly, different religions and cultures, and our own individual buy-in of these beliefs, greatly influence our views of life and death. Regardless of what they are, these values are drummed into most people from a very early age, and many find that later in life they may begin to question these truths. As a result, as we age, how we think of life and death can change dramatically. Today in the West, we have no uniform religious or cultural beliefs, so we have no specific place where we believe everyone goes after death. We don't even have a uniform language for dying. Some people simply say their loved ones died. Others say they passed over, or made their transition, or have gone home. The complex attitudes and language in the West arises from this hodgepodge of different cultures, theories, and religions all coming together to form our diverse society. Our wide-ranging beliefs include everything from reincarnation to purgatory to nirvana and many gradations of each. We wrestle with and accommodate an unnerving combination of ideas and definitions. Each religion has developed their own narrative over thousands of years to explain something that seems inexplicable. As you can see, relying on religion doesn't provide a simple answer about what happens to us. The scientific view of death. In contrast with religion, mainstream science has developed its own views of death, and as expected, they don't intersect much with more spiritual views. While some religions speak of a soul and spiritual consciousness, science generally doesn't endorse the concept that consciousness survives death. Actually, science can't even define consciousness, and they offer no definition for what we'd typically call an extraordinary experience. Science requires proof, and these experiences and the notion of eternal life don't easily lend themselves to the proof designed to satisfy the scientific model. The scientific method requires constant corroboration and reproduction, but if you've ever had an extraordinary experience or even a dream, you know they can't be reproduced at will. Dreams and visions and even gut hunches.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?